Caveman Warriors is a brand new indie game for the Switch this week that came out to PS4, Xbox One, and PC earlier this fall. It's a platformer that seems to have roots in classic Metal Slug design. Let's see if it's able to keep the same gameplay momentum and not just aesthetics. Caveman Warriors' story isn't its strong suit, nor is it an important one for this game either. The game follows 4 cavemen whose children have been kidnapped by high-tech aliens that come invading the planet. Join Jack, Liliana, Mo, and Brene as they go after the aliens to save their children, fighting off all the bosses and enemies that come in their way. The story is told through transitions between the stages that come in the form of comic book panels. They get the job done, but the story overall is forgettable and not really vital to the game. It's just sort of there to give a backdrop to the gameplay. Caveman Warriors is a modern platformer that's inspired by platformers of the past like Metal Slug, Super Mario, and of course Joe and Mac. It's a up to 4-player co-op game, though it's completely playable with just a single person if that's your situation. If you're playing on the Switch, you can actually assign a single Joy-Con per player for easy co-op on the go. Sadly, online co-op isn't a feature here, so you're stuck playing either local or just by yourself. When starting the game, you choose the character you play as, though if you're playing alone that really doesn't matter just because you can change the characters on the fly with the press of a shoulder button. Each of the 4 characters in the game have their own unique abilities and attributes, and it's up to the player to use the appropriate character for the coordinating obstacle. For example, Liliana has spears that she can throw at specifically marked walls to turn the spears into platforms. On the other hand, Jack has a charge tackle that can break down through certain walls. Each character can move around, jump, and super jump to higher platforms. 2 different action buttons are mapped to a swing and throwing motion. The last button lets you put a marker on where your character is on screen. It's pretty useful if you're playing with more than one person and you want to keep track of where your character is in the game. If you're playing co-op with friends, the game does require you to do some planning and cooperation, of course, but if you're playing alone, it definitely requires you to have more coordination later on in the levels when the game asks you to switch pretty quickly and on the fly. That need to switch characters is introduced at a gradual pace that keeps the difficulty incline at check, at least for the most part. Each level has its own theme to it along with its own enemies. The structure of each level has you go through sections marked with checkpoints that give you a certain amount of meats that act as lives. Die the same amount of times as you have meats at the checkpoint and you go back to the beginning of the stage. Your character also has a health and stamina gauge that can be refilled with the drops left after beating an enemy. However, the game doesn't really do a great job at explaining which drop does what, and so it's always kind of a secret as to which drop refills which gauge and how much. At the end of every level is a boss fight that definitely is the highlight of each level. They add new battle schemes to fighting enemies and they're pretty fun. In total, there's 8 levels, but you can also unlock an arcade mode that's more of a challenge mode, along with extra levels by completing the game and collecting the battery collectibles in the main campaign. In total, you can beat the game in about 3 to 5 hours, varying on your skill, but the extra bonus levels in arcade mode can definitely increase that playtime. However, my problem with the game comes with the inconsistency of the gameplay. Some of the attacks, for example, are able to phase through the floors and platforms to hit enemies from afar, while others cannot, like the spear. There doesn't seem to be a set rule with certain gameplay elements, and it can be quite cumbersome at times, especially when the game decides to throw a bunch of enemies on the screen at once. At times, the game can feel smart in its placement of enemies, requiring a balance of skill in both platforming and combat from the player. In other situations, there's an abundance of enemies on screen where it feels like the designers just said, we should add a really hard part to this level, let's put as much enemies as we can on screen. The controls can also feel a bit slippery at times. They definitely took a bit to get used to because jumps from platform to platform just didn't feel as tight as they should be. When I did land a jump, usually an oddly placed enemy would hit me upon my landing and knock me back, usually leading me to falling off the stage or getting hurt more. It can definitely be a bit frustrating at times. At first glance, Caveman Warriors looks very much like a modern Metal Slug game with updated visuals and a new art style that's more reminiscent of something like Castle Crashers. It's honestly going to be hit or miss on the player, varying on the player's view of flash animation. Caveman Warriors looks pretty much like a Newgrounds animation, and I've never had a problem with that art style, but I know others definitely do, and are immediately turned off by it. If you're playing this on the Switch and you play it on the go with the smaller display, things scale down pretty well. It's one of the more sharper looking games on the system thanks to that art style. Backgrounds are 50-50 though. They can be a bit compressed looking at times, there is sort of a blur effect on them that give a nice bokeh look to the gameplay, but it ends up looking more like a pixelated effect rather than a blur effect. It's much more noticeable when you play on a TV than on the Switch's display. With that said, I do like that the backgrounds are animated, sometimes showing off the wildlife or the terrain of the setting the level takes place in. It's a really nice touch and the effort shows, though it's slightly held back by that pixelated blur effect. The music tracks in Caveman Warriors are very lively. Whether you're traveling in a cave or the tropics of prehistoric Earth, the music definitely vibes well with the gameplay. The sound effects of water shooting up from the sea or the little clink of collecting an item brings joy to me. It gives off a very happy feeling game vibe, if that makes sense. However, the voice clips of characters could get a bit annoying at times. Like anytime your character performs a swing or throws their weapon and they say the same yeah sound over and over again, that definitely got annoying and repetitive rather quickly. Caveman Warriors is an alright platformer that I feel like it aims high to be stellar like the platformers that inspired it, though it's more of a mediocre title. It's not terrible, but I don't think it brought anything significantly new or interesting to the table that makes it stand out. The co-op play is fun. I like that it tries to bring back those roots of classic co-op platformers and arcade games. It definitely made me reminiscent of the times I used to play the Simpsons arcade game at my local pizzeria when I was a kid. However, some gameplay mechanics like the controls feeling slippery and how some rules apply to some game elements but not all of them without explanation can make the game feel convoluted at times. Currently the game goes for $12.99 and unless you're in a serious drought for an average platformer, I think you'll be fine if you miss out on this game. That does it for my review of Caveman Warriors for the Nintendo Switch, Xbox One, PS4, and PC. If you have any questions about the game, feel free to ask me in the comment section down below. Once again, I am in the middle of my college finals, so sorry I haven't been as responsive in the comments or on social networks. After December 12th, I'm pretty much done with the semester, so I should have more free time. I'm going to be more active on YouTube, social networks, so maybe some live streams in the future as well, so look forward to that. Thank you all very much for watching, hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you all in the next one.